Hi, welcome to Cybersecurity Metrics. This is a webinar sponsored by Sumo Logic. If you're not familiar with Sumo Logic, we're a secure cloud-native as-a-service machine data analytics platform, delivering real-time continuous intelligence into single cloud, multi-cloud, and hybrid cloud environments. My name is Mike Reinhardt. I'm the Product Marketing Manager here for our Security Analytics solution. I'll be joined by Dr. Eric Cole here in a moment, and looking forward to a very insightful webinar from an industry expert that we rely on heavily here at Sumo Logic. Again, if you're not familiar with Sumo Logic, we've been in business a little over eight years now, serving the needs of customers as they go through digital transformation and innovation in their security, the running of applications, development of applications, again in multiple different environments, from companies that started out as a brick and mortar are moving to the digital world. People like New York Times, New York Life, and those companies that were built in the cloud from day one, such as Twitter, Salesforce, Airbnb. Our customers range from those that are just going on the first stages of their journey, going through the digital transformation, starting with a SaaS type of a platform, things like Office 365 or Salesforce in their environments, usually the first phase. And then many of them are developing digital applications on their premises or in data centers, and then are shifting those to cloud environments to get the ability to take advantage of that elastic, scalable environment. As I mentioned before, the solution provided by Sumo Logic is able to bring context and insights and visibility from multiple ranges of sources, including, as I mentioned, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, premises-based environments, SaaS environments, but we're also providing insights into the full application stack, where many of the security solutions today are having issues in providing organizations with the management and intel that they need. So we're going to jump into this session here quickly, but as a housekeeping measure, if you have questions, we do have the ability to take those through the chat window on the website here. So please put those into the website. We'll get those as we can. And without further ado, I'm going to shift this over to our esteemed guest, Dr. Cole. He's an industry-recognized security expert and speaker, 20 years experience in the industry, has an amazing practice with lots of insights and information around compliance and security, especially with the needs that are current today in our environment. He holds an MS in computer science from NYIT, a doctorate from Pace University, and also has an author of several books. Some of them are downloadable on his website as well. And he's an inventor with several patents to his name. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Cole to take us through the rest of the session. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you so much, Mike, and pleasure to be with you today to talk about one of my favorite topics, cybersecurity, and in particular, security metrics. The reason why this topic is so critical is organizations today don't have proper visibility into their security. They don't understand and know what's happening. And one of my phrases I always say is, you can't manage what you can't measure. If you don't know if you're doing good or bad, if you don't know where the exposures and weaknesses are, you can't fix it. And I will tell you, I've worked on a lot of these breaches. Most of these big breaches you've heard about both recently in the last 2 to 3 weeks and over the last 2 to 3 years, we've had involvement. And I will tell you what happens in every case. The organization is surprised when we go in and do the incident response and we tell them this server was visible from the internet, it had a missing patch, it had critical data that either wasn't encrypted or the key was stored plain text on the server. In many cases, they come back and say, wait a second, that server wasn't supposed to be on the internet, or that patch was supposed to be applied X months ago, or what was that data doing on that system? They don't have the proper metrics. They aren't measuring correctly, so they don't know where their weaknesses are. So what I'd like to do in this session is just walk you through how do we measure cybersecurity. How do we start measuring and getting visibility into the threat and the exposure? Then how can we start getting some positive results? What are some expectations you should set with your team? And most importantly, what are some of my favorite, I'll give you 10 of my favorite metrics that I like using with customers. Many of us at some point in our life have gone to school. And I have 3 kids, one in college, one in high school, one in middle school, and they love their grades, right? They always worry about their grades when the report card comes out. But question, why do we get grades in school? The reason we get grades in school are 2 things. 1, to see how you're doing, and 2, to see where there's weaknesses on areas that you need to improve. And how would you feel if you were taking a college class and every homework assignment you thought you got an A, and every quiz you thought you got an A, and every test you thought you got an A, and then at the end of the semester you get an F? Well, that's how many companies feel. Because I will tell you, most companies don't think they're going to have a breach. These big companies that have been compromised, I don't think they woke up in the morning and said, you know something? We stink. We have terrible security. We're miserable. We're not spending any money on security. We're going to get breached. We're going to get owned. We're in trouble. Now, yes, there might be 1 or 2 people on the security team that are saying this is crazy. The problem, though, is they're not communicating those grades or metrics to the executives. And I know a lot of security people go, oh, no, Eric, my executives don't listen. Oh, come on. Let's be honest here. Do you really think a CEO of a company wants to have a major breach? Do you really think the executive teams want to have 50 million records stolen and be all over the news and have a huge reputational hit to the company and potentially lose their job when an attack occurs? Absolutely not. So sitting there and saying that your executives don't care is not a valid statement. Probably the more accurate statement is there's not proper communication. They don't have the proper metrics to have the visibility to make the correct decisions within the organization. And I know sometimes security people get mad at me, but I've sat in a lot of these meetings, and security folks are really, really good at being emotional. They're really good at going in, going, it's over, right? The world is going to end. This is bad. This is, right? And yes, they're passionate, and I love passion, right? I love that emotion. The problem is executives don't respond to emotion. And I talk to a lot of executives, and they tell me all the time, listen, Eric, I am concerned about security. I will tell you there's not a well-versed CEO that doesn't wake up every morning and when they look in the mirror to brush their teeth, they ask themselves, is today the day? Is today the day we have a breach? Is today the day we're all over the news? Because they don't understand, they don't know, they don't have visibility, and they tell me the security team is not giving me the information I need. And that's why I love doing these webinars with great organizations that have solutions like Sumo Logic, because now I'm not just telling you about the problem, we have a solution. There's a solution out there that will give you that metrics, that will give you the visibilities, not only for you to understand, but also for the executives to have that visibility they need into the problem. Because I will tell you right now, executives are scared. They want information from their security team, and they're not getting it. And most executives don't realize how bad the problem might be for a simple reason. They're spending money. Do you realize every company that has had a major breach has been spending over over $50 million on security? Yeah, 50,000 would be a little low. Sorry about that. 50 million on security or more. They typically have teams of hundreds of people, and they're still getting compromised. So from the executive's perspective, they're sitting there and saying, I'm writing big checks. I'm hiring good people. We're buying lots of stuff. So they believe they are giving the resources that are needed. Now, if those resources are not enough, they're not being allocated correctly, then you need to have that visibility. You need to have those metrics to be able to make those decisions. And here is really the problem. The problem is right here in this first bullet. What is the metric that almost every executive and every organization uses to determine how well their security is? If we don't have a compromise. If we don't have a compromise, we're doing our job. That means the security team is doing what they're supposed to. And if a breach occurs, that means the security team failed. And you might say, Eric, how do you know that? It's simple. What happens every single time there's a breach? The CISO gets fired, right? The CISO goes bye-bye, right? Somebody is going to get shot, and it's always the CISO, which tells us that the executive blames them for having a breach because they do not believe it is supposed to happen. And now any of us who have worked in security know that is a terrible, terrible metric because it's going to happen. If something is going to happen and that's your metric, you're basically on a short-term lease with your job. I always joke that CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers today, are a lot like NFL coaches. They're going to get fired and they have a quick turnaround, but they're always going to find a job, right? Somebody will always hire them. So if you're a CISO listening to this, you have one of two options. You can either ignore what I'm saying and recognize that in 6 or 9 or 12 months, you're probably going to get fired. But the good news is, because you're an experienced CISO and there's not a lot of them, you'll actually get hired by somebody else with probably a 10 or 15% raise. So that's the positive. If you want to keep your job, then you probably want to listen in on some of the different metrics that are out there to give that proper visibility. Now, here's something else to keep in mind. Not only is that metric, if we don't have a compromise, that means our security is good, is dangerous for the CISO, but it's also very dangerous for the CEO. If you go back and remember the Target breach, the Target breach was very pivotal for security for many, many reasons, but probably the biggest one was that was the first time in which there was a major breach that the CISO got fired by the board of directors for not overseeing security correctly. And let me give a quick background here. The CEO of Target, before that breach, was an amazing CEO. They were meeting all the targets. They were exceeding all the expectations. Their stocks were rising. I mean, they were doing great. Other than that breach, their record was almost flawless. However, the breach was so devastating that the board of directors thought that the executive should have had better visibility, should have had better metrics, and should have asked better questions. So not only was the CISO fired, but the CEO was fired several months later after that breach. So the good news for security folks is this is an executive level area. They want visibility, they want to understand the risk, and they want effective metrics. But we have to recognize that the metrics we're under today, not having a breach, is a really bad metrics because you're going to have a breach. You're going to be compromised. So here's what I do with my clients. We flip it. Instead of the metric being we're not going to have a breach, what if we flip it and the metric is number of attacks or number of breaches or number of compromises? And let me explain. I was recently over in Saudi Arabia, and I gave a keynote presentation, and my flight wasn't until later in the evening, so I sat around at the conference, and the next group that came up was a panel discussion. And they started off the panel discussion, and the head said, okay, can each of my panelists introduce themselves? And the first person gets up, and they introduce themselves, and then they make a statement. We have not had a single breach or a single attack in 3 years. And he put his hands up like Rocky, and everyone was like, yeah. And he was like, go. Like, and everyone was getting all excited and pumped, and like this was an amazing thing. And then the next person gets up, and they sort of take this deep breath. They sort of put their head down, lose eye contact with the audience, and are like, I hate to say this, we've had 4 breaches in the last 3 years. And you almost heard this silence, like a few people boo that wanted to like put the person down. And I'm watching this, and I got to be honest with you. This was about the most galactically stupidest thing I've ever seen on the planet. That person who said that they didn't have a breach for 3 years, in my opinion, should be fired for gross negligence. And the person who said we've had 3 or 4 breaches is a hero. Why? You are getting breached. And if you say it's 0, it's not because it's not happening. It's because you have bad metrics. It's because you're not looking in the right spot. So to me, we need to change this culture. We need to change this awareness with executives that attacks and breaches aren't a bad thing. And I'll give you a little bit of the punchline, because one of the things when I give presentations, every 5 to 10 minutes, I want to give you actionable takeaways. So here's the first thing. What if you created a chart that once a week you told your executives the number of attempted attacks against your organization? How many times people are trying to break in and are being stopped? And I will tell you, that is going to be a huge awareness change, because executives have no clue. I've talked to executives. I've asked them. I've asked CEOs of big companies, how many times a week are you attacked? And you know what the average answer is? 14. No zeros after it. 1, 4, that's it. And I'll let you in on something really revealing. I asked one of these big CEOs of a $1 billion organization why they said 14. And you know what their response was? They said, Eric, the reason I said 14 is because to me, 14 is insignificant. If it was 20 or more, it would be a significant event, and I would expect my security team to tell me. So because my security team is not telling me what's happening, I'm assuming it's a very low number. And you know something? They're right. Why aren't we telling them? Why aren't we telling them that it's 14,000? Why aren't we telling them it's 140,000? We need to give those metrics and visibility to the executives so they are more aware and they are making better decisions within their organization. And I'll tell you, for almost everyone on this call, the number is probably 20, 30, 40,000 attempted attacks. Now, you might be going, but Eric, I don't have that data. Yes, you do. What is another word for an attempted attack? Dropped packets in your firewall. Every time your firewall drops a packet, that is essentially an attempted attack, because if it wasn't, you would have allowed it through. So just run a report of the number of drop packets in your firewall, and boom, you got a good estimate. Now remember, don't overthink this. One of the things I love working in cybersecurity is we have really smart people. The problem with really smart people is they want to overthink and argue everything. So yes, is a drop packet identical to an attempted attack? Not identical, because one attack could have 10 or 15 packets to it, but guess what? It's a close enough number, it's accurate enough, and it gets the point across. So don't try to overthink these problems. Go in and start verifying and validating that information. So I go in and I said, where would we get the numbers from? Exactly, just go to your firewall and just run a report. Every commercial firewall out there has the ability to go in and tell you the number of drop packets. So great question from Jason, but just run that report, get that visibility, and start giving that information to the executive team once a week. And I will tell you, after a few weeks, you'll start to see a change. They're going to start to ask you more questions. They'll start to engage. They're going to start to make different decisions, because guess what? An executive that believes they are 100% secure and are never going to get attacked, which is where many are today, are going to make different decisions than an executive that realizes they're getting attacked 40,000 times a week, and attacks are inevitable and compromises are going to occur. They are going to think and act differently. but you have to give them that information. So when we're looking at these metrics, the first thing we have to recognize, what information would be valuable to our executives? Because I'll tell you, a lot of metrics that security teams have are not very valuable, are not very useful. And I know some people are going to get mad at me when I say this, but I always laugh when I go into a company security operations center, because you go into most SOCs and they have TV monitors everywhere and they have all these crazy charts. Like usually the big TV in the middle has a map of the globe with all these crazy lines going back and forth on it. And I don't know who came up with that a security operations center must have a map of the world, right, with crazy lines going all over the place. But I go and ask the engineers, well, what is that telling you? What is that information being used for to make decisions? And you know what the response I usually get 9 times out of 9? Oh, it looks cool. It looks impressive. It gets people's attention when they walk by that there's a lot of things going on the internet. Useless metric. If it's not helping to drive your business, then it's not valuable. And the problem with most of those monitors in Security Operations Center is they are very complex metrics that nobody understands. Right? It goes back to that old thing of put on a lot of blinky lights to impress your execs, but it's not valuable. Keep the metrics simple. The metrics should be simple enough that if you give them to your executive team, they can understand them in 5 seconds. And they should be simple enough that they provide valuable information to you and your organization. Things like number of attempted attacks. Things like how long does it take to detect a compromise within your organization. And then we start getting into some of the root cause. Why is it that many breaches occur? It's because patches are not applied in a timely manner. Yes, if we go back 10 years ago, most companies were patched up to date, and you remember most of the attacks were zero-day exploits. They were unpublished, 0 days, so even if you had a fully patched, up-to-date system, you still got compromised. Fortunately or unfortunately, today, almost every single attack is a missing patch. Attackers aren't using 0 days because they don't need to. We're not patching our systems and we're not keeping them up to date. So instead of a crazy map of the world with lines going all over the place, what if on that monitor you had a list of every server visible from the internet that was missing a critical patch for more than 45 days? So any system that has a critical or high patch, that's the patch been released and it hasn't been applied in 45 days, and the server is visible from the internet, those should be up on the monitor. That's what we should be displaying. Because guess what? That is by far one of the main ways organizations are breaking in to companies today. It's because we're missing patches. Another one, why is critical, sensitive information on internet-facing systems? So once again, any public IP address that has critical customer information, critical data to the organization that is not public, that should be up on a monitor. Those IP addresses should be listed because that's what the attackers are going after. So we need to change our metrics to better align with how the attackers are breaking in and how they're compromising our organizations. So a couple of little tricks, having built out security dashboards, and that's really where we're going here. That's, to me, really one of the huge benefits of the Sumo Logic software is it will let you build that security dashboard. It will give you that visibility so you can quickly see where problems and issues are. And if we want a simple example of this, look at a car. Your car dashboard is meant to give you information. Are you running out of gas? Is the engine overheating? Are you going too fast, right, based on the roads? That whole dashboard is meant to be organized in a simple, effective way to give you that visibility to let you know if there's a problem or an issue. And if you want a more complex example, you look at an airplane, right, with all the information in that cockpit. That information is meant to give the pilots easy information so they can keep the plane in the air and keep flying safe. Where's your security dashboard? Is your security dashboard giving you the information you need to make those decisions, and also those higher level metrics for the executives to have that proper visibility? So first one, are the metrics meaningful? Do they provide value? And you can do this exercise. We do this with clients. Many of our clients don't have very good metrics, but the ones that do, I'll sit there and ask them a simple question. What does this metric mean? What information are you gaining from this? And two things to keep in mind when you ask yourself those questions. If you can't answer it within 5 seconds, or you can't answer it within 1 sentence, it's probably not a good metric. It's probably not a helpful metric to the organization. Also, are the metrics reproducible and comparable? Can you compare them across systems? One of the metrics that I see a lot of clients use, and I don't like it because it's not a consistent reproducible metric, is vulnerability scanning data. So I sit in a lot of these meetings where these big companies will put the results of the scanning data. Well, we found 450 high vulnerabilities across Windows systems, and X number against Mac systems, and X number against Linux systems, and we found this, and we found that, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting there going, okay, the number of patches and the number of vulnerabilities inconsistently change over time. So if that's what you're using, you're basically, this month it could be high, next month it could be low, because that information is always changing and not consistent. Now you might say, but Eric, you just mentioned about patching. Yes, but notice the difference. My metric was on remediation, not on the scanning. Big difference. Scanning is only identifying the problem. Remediation is fixing the issue. So I don't want you using or giving your execs vulnerability scanning metrics. I want you giving your execs vulnerability remediation metrics. Remediation metrics are reproducible and consistent. The scanning data is not. So notice it's a switch, right? You can't remediate without the scanning, but it's what are you focusing on, and make sure the metrics are manageable. I would typically start with a small number. Get 2 or 3 metrics, and Sumo Logic can provide a lot of this in their tool. They can give you a lot of this information I'm talking about. They solve a lot of these problems for you, but pick 2 or 3 and then slowly expand out. I also go into a lot of companies and they have 80 or 90 different metrics. They're just out of control. Nobody understands them and way too complex. So yes, this is definitely an area where you want to keep it simple. You want to focus on the solution, not the problem. So when we look at cyber threats, what are we really looking at? What we're really looking at when we look at cyber threats is we want to do early detection and we want to control the damage. That's really the name of the game in cybersecurity. The name of the game in cybersecurity is not prevention. Prevention is ideal, detection is a must, but remember, you will never be able to prevent all attacks. So sitting there and saying our goal is to be 100% secure is naive, and you're never going to get there. And I know sometimes when I talk with folks and I go 100% security doesn't exist, that they push back. So yes, let's play this for a second. 100% security absolutely exists. If this computer that I'm giving this webinar on, if I wanted to make it 100% secure, what would I do? Well, I was giving this once at a presentation. I asked the audience, and somebody screamed down and said, well, turn it off. And somebody said, but you can turn it back on again. So someone else said, well, turn it off and smash it to pieces with a hammer. And then somebody said, but you can glue the pieces back together, right? We had some really creative people. So I said, okay, what if we turn it off, smash it to pieces, put it in a ditch and fill it with cement, right? And then everyone sort of agreed it's 100% secure. What's the issue with that? The issue with 100% security is there's zero functionality. There's zero value. So the trick you have to remember is anytime you add functionality, anytime you add an application, you're decreasing security. And our systems today are pretty complex. So every application, every additional feature, every additional software component that we're putting on a system is decreasing that security, which means we are very far from 100% secure. However, we have to change our focus. Many companies today are still trying to prevent all attacks, be 100% secure, and that's why they're failing. And the analogy I give is there anyone listening to this webinar that is the perfect specimen of a human, that you are 100% healthy and you honestly believe that you will never, ever get sick? Any takers? Most of you are probably laughing. If this was a live event, there's always some person that jokingly raises their hand. Oh, yeah. And I always go over to them, and I'm like, give me your phone. And they're like, what are you going to do? I'm like, let's call your significant other, and let's tell them that you just said you're 100% perfect. And when the laughter stops, we'll have the answer. Right? None of us are 100% healthy. Every one of us knows there are some issues wrong with us, and every one of us knows we are going to get sick. So nobody approaches life saying, I'm never going to get sick. The way we approach life, the reason why we exercise and we take vitamins and we eat healthy is to minimize the frequency in which we get sick and the impact it has on our lives. If somebody gets sick once a year, nobody's going to say they're weak. Nobody's going to say they're wrong. That just happens. Now, yes, if you're getting sick every week and being put in the hospital, there might be some weaknesses in your immune system, but overall, getting sick once in a while is not a bad thing. So notice the shift. In our lives, we're not focused on never getting sick. We're focused on minimizing the frequency and the impact. That same shift has to occur in security metrics. We have to stop having metrics that are focused on 100% security. We have to stop saying we're never going to get breached. And what we need to focus our metrics on is how can we go in and minimize the frequency in which we get compromised and the impact it has to our organization. And that's what we get with the Sumo Logic visibility. We're getting visibility into the problem so we can make better decisions and better protect and secure our organization. Now, I love taking questions throughout the presentation, so let's go ahead and look at a few. So we get one, how long should you wait before changing security metrics? And this is always a tricky one because you don't want to keep changing every week because you don't have enough time, but you don't want to wait a year. What I find is it's usually about 90 days, about 3 months. See, are you getting value? Are you getting information? And then here's the real question. Are you using the metrics? And are the executives using the metrics to make better decisions? And if it's not giving you value, if it's not giving you insight, then I would recommend changing that metric about every 90 days. But give it some time. Don't change too quick. And honestly, with what I'm seeing with clients, it's never the changing too quick. It's the never changing. We have clients that have used the same metrics for 3 years, and they're not getting any value from it, but they won't change. We always joke around, what is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So if the metrics aren't working, we want to change. So here's my 7 steps that we use with our customers all the time. First, what is the goal and objective? What is the goal and objective you're trying to achieve? And I'll give you a few. Once again, you need to decide for your organization. But to me, one goal is to give the executives accurate information on the overall security of our organization. Objective would be to better understand the likelihood of a breach to minimize the overall impact. Another goal could be to identify potential problems and fix them before they could become major. I tend to be accused of being a little obsessive, right? But I get blood work done once a quarter because to me, one of the best indicators of problems in your body is slow changes in the blood work. If your cholesterol goes up 3 points, that doesn't seem like a big deal. But let me ask you a question. If for the last 8 quarters, it keeps going up 3 points every quarter, that's problematic. So what I do is I'm looking for trending of small changes that could lead to big issues and fix them before they become major. And that's really what we're trying to do with your security program is get those visibility so when we start seeing a little issue, okay, you know something? Last quarter, we didn't have any servers that were missing critical patches. This quarter, we have 1. Next quarter, we have 3. Next quarter, we have 4. Now, yes, you could sit back independently and say 4 patches is not a big deal. But if you look at the trend, that's a problematic trend. So you want to always be looking for those trends to be able to fix them beforehand. So once you understand those goals and objectives, then you want to go in and determine what are the simplest metrics that we can generate. What is the simplest information that would give us that visibility to be able to make those better decisions? And once again, just using the analogy from the real world, if you've ever got blood work done, they give you 4 sheets. I mean, there's all this stuff of 4 pages, probably hundreds, but I just focus on 4 items. There's just 4 key items that I look at that I track and trend to be able to look at the overall health. Same thing here. Yes, there's tons and tons of data, but what are the key areas? What are those strategies that we want to use for creating or generating those metrics? And then here's the big one. Is there any way you can get those metrics with the existing technology you have? One of my big pet peeves with most of my clients is they're always buying new stuff. There's always, no. Yes. If you're missing a critical dashboard, if there's a critical piece of your arsenal that you're missing, like a dashboard, you absolutely want to buy that. But if your firewall can give you drop packets, you don't need another device for that. So I'm not talking about the correlation. Most organizations don't have dashboards and metric reporting, so they would need that. What I'm referring to is if you have firewalls and IDSs and SIMs and all this other stuff, see if that will provide that metric into that dashboard without having to go in and add yet more tools that duplicate what you already have. If you have a gap, that's great, but don't keep buying duplicates thinking that's going to solve the problem or solve the issue. Then how are we going to report? And then most important, what is the action we're going to take when those thresholds exceed? And what we're really getting at here with our metrics is what we call clipping levels. Have you ever wondered how credit cards deal with fraudulent activity? Credit card fraud is out of control, and believe it or not, credit cards are doing a really good job. And you know how they're doing it? With something called clipping levels. They create a range of normal activity, and anything that exceeds that range, they call a clipping level, and they're going to go in and report that to you. You want to do the same thing here. You want to say, okay, what is the over and under? What are those ranges that are acceptable? And then any of those metrics that go above or below, you automatically set off alerts, and you automatically get visibility into the problem. So once again, I'm just seeing if there's any more questions coming in. If you do have questions, please type them right in. I'd love to answer those for you. Otherwise, as I start to sort of round out and finish up, we still have about 20 minutes left. I want to go through some of the 10 metrics that I find very valuable. Because what I like to do with this presentation is not just state the problem, state the issues, but give you actual solutions. Now, my recommendation is don't start off with all 10. I know many of you are overachievers and want to do all of this at once, but what I really recommend is pick 1 or maybe 2. Pick one or two, start there, but don't pick the metric and try to force it into the problem. Figure out what the problem is. What is the number one problem you have in your organization today? And I would argue, and if it's not correct for you, that's fine, but I would argue with most of my clients, the number one problem they have today is they are not communicating effectively to executives with clear metrics on the overall security of the organization. I believe with most organizations, the executives do not have proper visibility. They do not have proper understanding of the real issues in security. Second big problem I see with most of our clients is the security team doesn't have the visibility to find the exposure points that are being exploited by the adversary. If you look at all these threats that are out there, these are servers visible from the internet, which means there's a finite number. If you look at total servers within an organization, the number that are visible from the internet is fairly small compared to the overall number of servers in their data center. So monitoring and looking at them is not super hard. So first, are there any new systems? Are there any new servers that are visible from the internet that we're not aware of? Then, in all of these breaches, it's not like it's a 0 day. It's not like the patch came out. In many of these cases, the patch was available for 6 months or more, and the company never applied the patch. That means companies don't have that visibility. If you knew there was a critical server that contained key information that would cause reputational damage to the organization, that should have been fixed. Now, if you tell me you had that visibility and ignored it, we have a whole other discussion. But that's not what I'm seeing out there. What I'm seeing today is companies don't have that information. Now, yes, you might argue that that information is buried within hundreds of thousands of other data points. And yes, I agree with that. With most of the incidents we've worked on with these large companies, when we start digging in, some security device on their network did detect the attack. Some device on their network did identify the problem, but the information is they had way too many data points. They had hundreds of thousands of data points or metrics, and their team could only look at 20. Let me ask you a question. If you're generating 20,000 alerts a day and you can only look at 20, what is the probability that you're going to miss the critical ones? Pretty darn high. So what we want to do here is don't have 20,000 metrics, have 20. Or have 2, or have 1. But keep it fairly simple. So first metric that we like setting up with our clients is average time to detect and respond to an attack. So if somebody breaks in to a system, how long does it take you to be able to recognize that and respond? Now, I know what many of you are thinking. Eric, there's no way we can do this. I have a team of 5 people or 6 people, and we have 20,000 servers in our organization. There's no possible way we can track this. And you know something? I agree with you. So I'm going to teach you a word that's very powerful when it comes to security metrics. And that word is this: de-scope the problem. Let me ask you something. Are all 20,000 systems the same criticality? Do all 20,000 systems have the same information? So here's what I would do. Adversaries are targeting systems that are visible from the internet that contain critical data. So I would take your 20,000 systems and say, give me a list of those 20,000 systems that are directly accessible from the internet that contain critical information that are missing patches. And I bet you that list will be a lot smaller. That list is going to be much smaller and more manageable. So what I just did is I took the 3 metrics that are needed for an adversary to break into a server. Because if the server's not visible from the internet, they can't break in. If it's not missing a patch, they can't break in. And if it doesn't contain critical data, the impact will be minimal. Now, if you want to get real crazy, if you're telling me that list is still too long, I would argue you have bigger problems. But if you really want to get down to it, there's a fourth piece. Why are the adversaries able to access information when all this information is supposedly encrypted? That's the part the media always misses with these breaches. This data is not just sitting there plain text. It's encrypted. So how is the adversary able to decrypt or break the keys? Answer simple. The key is stored on the server where the data is located. So if you really want to get down to it, all of these major breaches of servers that we've seen over the last couple of years is systems visible from the internet, missing patches, contain critical data with not proper key management. Those systems should be a pretty small number. So if one of those metrics is not working for you, then combine multiple metrics together. So put 4 or 5 of those. Now, I would prefer that you do a single metric of any system visible from the internet or any system missing patches, but if that's too complex, descope the problem. Start minimizing or reducing down and then looking at those specific systems. Another one is true positive, false positive. How many alerts are you getting that are actual attacks? Or how many times are you getting alerts and it's not an attack? What we've seen with one of our clients, and it totally shocked me, 80% of their security operations center was spent on false positives, which meant the fundamental problem is their SIM solution was not properly tuned. They were giving a lot of false results. So instead of hiring more SOC staff, the real solution was better tune your use cases for your SIM to give better, more accurate information or details. And then our third one that I touched on is fixing vulnerabilities. And the good news today is most attacks are known vulnerabilities. So really what we're getting at, which is what's on our next slide, is really patching. And I'll be honest with you. I've been working in security for 30 years. And if 30 years ago, in the 1989, you told me that in 2018, patching was still going to be a problem, that companies were still going to have systems with critical information missing patches for 6 months, I would have said you're crazy. I would have said you're nuts, you're out of control. But unfortunately, here we are. Here's where we are today. Now, yes, I'm not saying that patching is the simplest thing, but on the other hand, this is a root cause problem that, yes, you can build metrics on the patches, you can build metrics on those, but the point of the metrics is to drive decisions. So we had a client of ours for over a year. They were tracking patch latency, and they were getting 4 or 5 systems every week that were missing patches for 90 days, and then they'd elevate, they'd create tickets, and eventually get fixed. And after a year, I basically called time out. I said, wait a second. Clearly this is a problem. Why don't we fix configuration management? Why don't we fix change control? Why don't we go in and make sure these patches are applied and the systems are not visible? And then once that metric got to 0 for 6 months, we didn't have to track the metric anymore because we fixed the root cause problem. So I also want to bring up here, when we talk about metrics, is there's some metrics that are just going to be long-term, like attempted attacks. You are never going to stop the adversary. You are never going to get that to 0. There is no root cause for that because it's a threat that you don't control. So if the metrics are threat-based in terms of adversaries causing harm, those are good long-term metrics. Those are metrics that you want to keep on your system. But if the metric, like with patching, is a vulnerability-focused, vulnerabilities are weaknesses in your environment. If everyone could put their phone on silent, that would be great. I'm getting some background noise from some of the folks on the phone here. So if everyone could mute their phone, that would be awesome. And that's the metrics we can track, right? Number of people that mute their phone so we don't get background noise, right? I love it. Always metrics, always problems there. So the point is with patching, that's a vulnerability metric. A vulnerability metric is something you control, which means you should fix those over time. Vulnerability metrics are short-term metrics. Those should eventually be fixed and you no longer need to track. Threat-based metrics, third-party, things we don't control, those are what you're going to keep over a long time. So your patch latency, that is a vulnerability metric. That should have proper configuration management. You should root cause that and eventually get that one fixed. But track the metric until it's fixed. Incident response, on the other hand, that is threat-based. You're always going to get targeted. You're always going to get attacked. 100% security doesn't exist as long as you have functionality in place. So you want to make sure that you're always tracking the number of incidents and fixing that. Then we have a question from Sherry. How are you seeing a successful tracking of patch latency? What we're seeing there is going in, and like I said, I'm always prioritizing. So I'm going to start, and this depends on your business. If you're like an e-commerce site, I'm going to start with internet-facing servers and looking at patches. If you're more like a defense intelligence agency where you don't have connections, you're dealing with classified information, pharmaceutical companies, things like that, where you're going to rely on an insider, clicking on links, and that's one we'll get to in a minute, right? Your insider threat, clicking on links. Then I would focus on your critical database servers. So I would first de-scope on what is going to be the entry point for an attack. Is it going to be internet-facing or your database? And then I would go in and look at how long is it taking for us to patch? And is that acceptable? If we're taking 30 days to patch critical and that's acceptable, then great. I want to look at anything over 30 days. Then I want to track it for 6 months and see how bad the problem is. If it's one of those things over 6 months, I get one critical patch over 30 days, then okay, maybe somebody just violated our policy, but we're probably in pretty good shape. But if we're getting 3 or 4 critical vulnerabilities over 30 days consistently, then we want to do a short-term remediation. We want to fix those, but then we want to spin off a separate project of root cause. Why are people not following the policy? Why are systems not being patched? What is the fundamental flaw in our current operating procedures, and fix those. So once again, if we look at a logic, when our metrics are flagged, we always want to look at, is this a threat-based where it's going to continue inevitable and we just need to monitor the metric, or is it a vulnerability-based where it's something that we control and we can manage that we need to fix and remediate short-term? Then we're starting to get into a little more of the complex ones as we finish up our top 10. But remember, security should be a business enabler. It should actually help the business succeed. And one of the companies I worked at 15 years ago, I basically ran the security team, and I told them, I said, listen, even though your job is security, any project you're involved with, I want you to do anything it takes to make sure it's successful and delivered on time and under budget. So what happened after a year is when the executives would run reports and say, okay, we have some of our projects that were completed on time and under budget, and other projects went way over budget and way over time. And they asked what was the difference. And the answer that was told to the CEO and board of directors is, well, funny thing, anytime the cybersecurity team is involved with a project, it always gets completed on time. And every time cybersecurity is not involved, it goes over budget. So what do you think they correlated? The secret to success is having cybersecurity involved with every project. So notice what we did is instead of forcing it, we went in and created metrics that we were tracking to be able to tie security to a success of a program. And like I said, we'll get a little bit more into some of the mature metrics, but I just want to make sure for some of you that are a little farther along, I'm not just giving the basic patch metrics, I'm giving you some more advanced metrics you can focus in on. So a follow-up question from Sherry. Also, I'm seeing Jose raising your hand. I don't have a way, Jose, to just call on you. So if you could just type your question in the question box, I would be happy to answer that question for you. But unfortunately, with this webinar, we don't have two-way comms, so I can't open up the mic and have you speak. So if you could just type your question, that would be awesome, because I'd love to answer any of the questions you have. So back to Sherry, do you rely on the patch management tool for reporting patching latency, or vulnerability scanners, or others? I'm a big fan of validation. So what I would do is I would go in and I would have the patch management tool give me a metric, which is sort of it saying which systems are there. And then I would also correlate that with my vulnerability scanning to see if the numbers align. Now, I'm not saying anybody would intentionally lie or falsify data. Unfortunately, it does happen, but I'm not saying that. Right? What I'm saying is sometimes tools can be misconfigured. And here's the worst thing. Wrong, inaccurate metrics. You actually go in, and this happened in college. I had an older car, and the gas gauge stopped working. And the way I found out was the gas gauge said full, and I ran out of gas. Now, shame on me, because you think I would have noticed that when I was driving the car 50 miles a day, I commuted to college, and after 3 days it stayed on full. That should have been an indicator to me that I had a false metric, but I didn't realize it until I ran out of gas. So we always want to make sure that our metrics are accurate and complete. So I'm a big fan of having multiple verification. So have your vulnerability scanner tell you missing patches, have your patch management tool tell you, have your admin tell you, and then cross-correlate. And if you're getting the same number, great. If you're not getting the same number, then you have a problem. And the trick, and one of the things that Sumo Logic can do for you, is automation. You don't have enough time to check 3 different areas to verify and validate. You want to be able to go in and automate this. So you can automate the management of those metrics from different sources so you have a single point of visibility. And remember, what we're really doing here when we talk about security metrics is risk analytics. We're trying to get information about what are the high risk areas to our organization, prioritize and fix those. And one of the other things, if you've ever heard me present before, one of the things I always focus on is whenever you're fixing a problem, make sure it's the highest priority risk. So when you're putting together your security metrics, ask yourself, what is the most critical risk to your organization, and are we focused in on that critical risk? And when you want to look at what metrics are important to your organization, look at some of your historical data. Go back over the last year and say, how many times have we got compromised? And if the answer is 0, ask yourself, how much accuracy do we have in that? Do we really believe that answer? Because the scary part today is because most companies don't have metrics. Most companies are compromised for almost 2 years before they realize it. So ask yourself, what is the probability that we might have a compromise and don't even realize it? How well are we doing with internet-facing systems? Do we know where our critical data is located? Are we fixing vulnerabilities in a timely manner? Now, yes, I know some of you listening to this going, Eric, vulnerabilities and patching and risk, that's nothing new. I know it's not, but I'm giving you a way to track it, and that is new. If companies were doing this, we wouldn't see the breaches that are out there today. So just a couple of things to consider as I wrap up. If your current metrics have been in place for more than 6 months, you might want to think about removing them if they're not working correctly. Also, 1 or 2 simple metrics, and my recommendation to you is to start with number of attempted attacks. That's a threat-based metric that's critical to your executives. And then the second metric I would recommend, which is a vulnerability-based, is number of critical servers visible from the internet that are missing patches for over 30 days. So number of internet-facing systems that are missing critical patches for more than 30 days. Start with those 2. If you start with those two, they will give you the visibility you need to make those better decisions. And Sumo Logic is a great tool for helping to give you that visibility. So I want to thank you for joining us today. If there's any questions, you can reach me at ecole@secureanchor.com. Otherwise, I want to thank our sponsor, Sumo Logic, and I'll briefly turn it back over to them.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Cole. That was a great session, very timely. It's a common problem many organizations are facing today. Again, I did type it into the chat window. The session has been recorded. The slides and the recording will be sent to those that signed up and attended today's session. Thank you for all taking the time to join us today, and look forward to talking with you in the future. SumoLogic.com if you have additional questions about the Sumo platform. Thanks again for joining, everybody.